Solution from Dr. Steve Charles with the dual pneumatic Innovate probe that got rid of the spring being the limiting factor for the improvement of duty cycle as we increase cutting speeds. So in this dual pneumatic setup, we have a closing pulse and an opening pulse, and we computer control how quickly we open and close, so we can control the duty cycle, unlike the variability of a spring. Now, there were some advantages and disadvantages to both those types of vitrectomy technologies. And again, both these were born out of 20 gauge. And so we wanted to develop for the Constellation a new range of vitrectomy probes that were focused and built around the requirement for MIVs. So out of that, we had a whole family of probes that were developed specifically for the Constellation and specifically for smaller gauge technology. So this is where we are with where we launched the Constellation with the original 5000 cutter, and what you have there is the duty cycles. How did that compare to the Accurus Vit probes? Well, it was half the speed, but we had a huge improvement with duty cycle, 22% improvement by doubling the cut rate and using new technology of course, using new technology of dual pneumatic drive. So this speed, does it really matter? And I remember in the old days talking to surgeons that they weren't that motivated going from 2,500 cuts to 5,000 at the time. And there was resistance. And part of that resistance was what they learned in 2,500 was the faster I go, the more closed the duty cycle is, which then did not help you with efficiency. It took a while to remove the vitreous. But now with this new UltraVit probe, we can become efficient. Now this to me is the money slide in terms of showing you how going from a slow cut speed to a medium cut speed to a faster cut speed, traction, and how clearly going faster is going to reduce your traction. So if we can put that together with a very good duty cycle, there's really no reason not to go to faster cut speeds. See if we can move the slide forward. So, faster, it improves shear, therefore the traction. The bite sizes of the vitreous become smaller. And what we've learned from that is that flow increases, the resistance to flow decreases, therefore flow increases. And we know aspiration is way more efficient on 10,000 cutters if you haven't used the 10,000 cutter. Pulsatile traction also reduces, and the aspiration forces decrease. It allows for more precise control of fluidics around the tissue and the port, and that's the quest for speed. So hopefully you'll see here the move to 7,500. We increase the speed again by 50%, and we improve the duty cycle. So at 5,000 you see the duty cycle splits. We're at 60 and almost 40, and they come together at 50-50 at 7,500. And then probably the best vitrectomy probe that we've ever made, the 10,000 cutter. And you can see here very clearly that the duty cycle comes together at 60%. Huge improvement. And if we compare that to where we were with the Accurus and the old 2,500 cutter, we're going 4 times faster with 34% increase in duty cycle. Amazing. So everything out there on a spring return cannot achieve this unless you're using a twin blade. So this is an amazing probe. I don't know if you had an opportunity to use this yet, but if you do, have a look at your flow rates. They're very good. This should also give you a compelling reason to consider using 27 gauge if you're at 25, and 25 gauge if you're at 23. Okay, and size does matter, I would argue, and smaller in this situation is definitely better. So why is that important? So Praveen Duggal coined the term sphere of influence, but basically smaller gauges can deliver an increase in precision and control. It allows you to get into smaller tissue planes, and flow is limited by gauge, which is a good thing because it adds to fluidic stability. So this is a great illustration of having a large gauge trying to pick out one M&M. Let's see how they go trying to pick up that one M&M. Not so good. They take out half the M&Ms. Let's try by putting a reducer on the end of that vacuum hose and see if we can pick out that one M&M. Amazing. We got the one. So that's sphere of influence. Without affecting everything else around it, we were able to cut out what we want to cut out. We've done a lot of evolution, bringing the port closer to the end of the distal end of the tip, and we've changed the way we close the end caps so that we could bring the port closer. But then our latest innovation, which I believe is incredible, is the bevel tip. And you'll see that on the 10,000 cutter. So let's have a look here. The bevel allows you to get 50% closer to what you're trying to cut. And you can use that port like a shovel to get underneath the membranes and just eat away nicely without taking out anything else. And that's the numbers for the bevel. I'm not going to show you the video, but I will show you the flow numbers. The little diamonds, purple diamonds, these are the flow numbers for BSS in different gauges at 7,500 cuts. The 7,500 probe, which I believe is the most popular probe at the moment here in Mexico. But have a look what happens with the 10,000. Dramatically improved. Huge efficiencies achieved, and while still improving the traction because we've increased the cut speed. What about vitreous? Still huge improvements in vitreous, as you can see there. Now, the other part that helps with flow characteristics and efficiency is the bevel. Let me show you our computer analysis of flow within a flat tip. And you can see that we have a lot of turbulence at the very tip. And then when we introduce the bevel, the flow is a lot closer to laminar flow. And then that's in BSS, but this is in vitreous now. So huge improvements. So that bevel tip not only helps with taking the fluid and the vitreous out of the eye, but it also helps you with using items like the proportional reflux. It's better at delivering the proportional reflux, and it angles it in a more effective way for what you're doing in the eye. So we won't go through this. At that, I'll kind of stop there and see if we have any questions about that, or if we want to talk about a specific area before I might even go into setting up the machine. Do we have any specific areas, questions that come up? I'm getting my translator here. Evo doubles up as a translator on top of all these other jobs.
Guys, please let us know if you have any questions. I already asked them in Spanish. Todos son panelistas, ¿sí? Así que solamente si están tímidos para la cámara, igual pueden, ¿sí? Nos pueden, ahí están todos. Nos pueden, Noé, ¿estás ahí? ¿Tienes alguna pregunta? Ya te ponemos.
Sí, no, me parece espectacular lo que está mostrando. El nuevo DJ como que con el orificio de corte muy cerca de la retina que nos permite cortar membrana y usarlo realmente como una tijera. Él recomienda este nuevo pieza de mano para toda la vitrectomía, para el core central también, o solamente cuando queremos sacar membranas o queremos trabajar muy cerca de la retina?
Bien, good question. He's talking about the new bevel. If you want to use it in all cases or only in cases that you know you're going to get close to the retina.
All cases. Why wouldn't you use it for all cases? Because you've got better flow characteristics, you've got better tractionless characteristics, so it's suitable for everything. You just get bonuses in every direction. Whether you're just doing a simple floaterectomy, whether you're doing a core vitrectomy, or whether you're doing a complex diabetic case. This is a probe that will do everything. And especially if you go smaller and smaller gauge. Vanessa, why don't you come? Join us.
Tenemos a la doctora también Vanessa Flores aquí con nosotros, a ver si, inclusive para hacer algún caso, ¿no? Vamos a hacer algún casito de los ojos artificiales, pero también, ¿hay ahí alguna otra preguntita? Pues está... Sí, Gabriela, ¿cómo estás?
Hola, gracias por darme la conexión de eso. Perdón, pero es que me atrapó una pasivamente. Michael, is this a dual lane tractor?
Yes, we do, but unfortunately Mexico is not one of the countries that's getting it at the moment. It's been released in the US, Japan, and a few other countries at the moment. The dual blade is a beast, and you really do need to prepare for that. I would urge you right now, those of you doing 25 gauge, this is your opportunity to go to 27 with the 10K. And I know the arguments. The first one is, I don't want to lose efficiency. And then the second one is flexibility of the instruments. So we've addressed the efficiency, as you can see with the graphs that we've gone through with duty cycle. The flexibility, there are some tips that we can talk about that will help you address doing that migration with minimal sort of torquing of the instruments. Gabby, does that answer the question for you?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Sir. You're very kind, man.
Thank you.
So, efficiency and flexibility.
They're the two. Well, if you listen to the reps, first is price, then efficiency and flexibility. But if you know me, to me, I think this technology is extraordinary. I believe that I can demonstrate how much more improvement that there is, and with anything else in life, if it's better, you're going to pay more for it. So it's a question of whether that adds sufficient value for you to pick up efficiency in other areas. So I never talk price, because to me that's a moot point. If we're having a price discussion, it's usually because you have not seen the value of the technology that I'm presenting.
What about...
Ivo,
yes.
one question more. In which cases do you prefer 23 gauge, 25 gauge, or 27 gauge?
Remember, I'm not a surgeon. I'm a backseat driver. I stand behind you and tell you what to do. So it doesn't really matter. But Vanessa, how do you feel about it? Because everyone's going to have an opinion, and I can share what I've seen other surgeons around the world do and what my personal opinion from that is. But I think a surgeon should answer that way.
Oh my, what I think is that the cases are suitable for 25 and 27 gauge. I have used the 10,000K 27 gauge, and it's really efficacious in performing the vitrectomy and to getting near the retina with membranes and I don't know, like macular hole, epiretinal membrane, but also in diabetic patients too.
So I'm sure you guys know Maria Baracol, right?
Yes.
wonderful surgeon. She does 27 gauge on everything. Stano Rizzo does 25 and 27. Kirk Paco does 25. My personal belief, you should be using 27 on everything, and maybe the exclusion would be a foreign body, where you're going to open up a sclerotomy a little bit larger anyhow. But to me, there are so many advantages that you're going to lose by going to a bigger gauge in terms of control. Why would you do that? If you can handle the flexibility, because now efficiency is a moot point.
No, Gabriela, por favor.
Gracias. I like to use 27 in macular cases, but I have my concerns about 27 in retinal detachments, because retinal detachments, sometimes you have to do very specific movements to get to the periphery, and it's not that easy, and it does bend a little, my experience. I'm talking about my experience.
Yeah.
So it seems to use the 27 for complicated retinal detachments.
Where do you place your sclerotomies right now, Gabby? In o'clock positions. Are you at 10 and 2?
Usually 11 and 2,
Yeah. So again, the guys that do 27 consistently, they come around at 9 and 3 o'clock, and they put one of those sclerotomies basically towards the feet of the patient. And I love uniplanar incisions. I don't like biplanar incisions. So we could demonstrate on the artificial eye as well. And then they put the other sclerotomy facing towards the head. So if they're doing any superficial vitrectomy work, they're in the port that's facing towards the head. And if they're doing any inferior work, they're in the port that's angled towards the feet. And that's how they sort of control a lot of that flexing. The other trick that they do is they use their light pipe to do any movement of the eye, because the light pipe is a lot stronger, it's a lot stiffer, and you follow with the vitrectomy port. It's not easy, but it can be achieved, and if you do, you'll get rewarded, in my opinion. Does that make sense?
Thank you very much. Yeah, it does. I will try it. Thank you very much.
Cool. Maybe we should try it Monday.
Yeah, we can. For sure, I will be happy to.
Okay. So maybe we could segue here and maybe. Do you want to demonstrate that?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. I'll let you go through. You'll go with this microsurgery thing in there, that's for sure. Maybe back off a little bit. So that's the bottom one there. And zoom out so that they can see. And maybe you can zoom in on these things.
Like this?
Yeah, just so they can see. So that's the top view. But once you show what you normally
I'm
do,
inverted.
so once you
I'm inverted.
so let's invert you. I need to come over here to invert it, unfortunately. There we go.
So the way you told us is like this.
So show them first what you do normally.
What I do.
Yeah, the biplanar. So this is what most people
I'm
do.
having double vision because
Alright.
I'm saying to do it.
Yeah, let me give you some glasses.
Sorry.
No worries. I put up with it.
Okay.
Is everything in focus for you?
Now we're talking.
Okay.
As I do it,
So this is, she's going in. So you saw that was biplanar. Her first incision is to create that shelf in theory, but in reality she's already in the eye. Yeah, she's already intracameral by that stage. So by the time she lifts, by the time that first incision comes in on an angle, and then she lifts, she's already in the eye, and then down. So my theory at the time when I was living in Japan was that lifting is actually ripping scleral fibers in the lifting. And I had a theory that basically led to more leaking incisions. So I had the Japanese surgeons do a bit of a study for me on a whole bunch of patients, and they did all sorts of exams, and they confirmed that uniplanar was much kinder and was better self-sealing, and there wasn't the trauma to the scleral fibers. So now I recommend 30, 45 degrees straight in, just uniplanar. So as Vanessa's doing now. And 3 and 9 o'clock position. So one towards, let's move this out of the way for you. And one back towards the head. Yeah.
¿Me mueves tu brazo tantitito? Allá. Gracias, es que si no, no.
This side doesn't have much of a socket to hold it in place.
It's like that.
Yeah, but like that. What do we think? Controversial?
No, we have to try it to adjust your movements to the eye, because some way you're used to some movements when you're operating.
Yeah.
So this is different, and you have to modify those movements to adjust to
Correct.
that new technology.
Correct. Any comments there? I'm going to pull out a light pipe here and the vitrectomy probe. I don't know if I can get close enough. Maybe we can do it over here under the microscope. That'd be better. Maybe Vanessa, if you don't mind, just showing the difference between the shaft of a light pipe, how long it is, and the shaft of the vitrectomy probe.
What's this?
The middle parts. So, you can, yeah. So you can see the stiffening. The stiffening shaft on the light pipe is a lot bigger. So that makes that light pipe much stiffer. Yeah, correct.
This is a light pipe, and this is a vitrectomy.
And the stiffening shaft on the vitrectomy probe is a lot shorter. So you're going to have much better control using the light pipe of the eye, and you use the vitrectomy probe to follow what you do with the eye. Does that make sense?
A lot of sense.
Practice with your 25 gauge. And I know you will bend 27, but it's amazing how much of a bend it still works with. All right. Shall we do we have any requests? Otherwise, I was going to show you a few things on the machine.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. Machine.
All right.
Thank you, Michael.
No worries. Thank you. All right. So I know I'm going to bore you with setting up the machine, and some of you may think that it's not your job. Let's put it in. Yeah. We're going to need this, but do you guys all know how to set up the machine? I'll take silence as a yes.
I think we have a lot of light over the.
Maybe we can tilt it down. I'll tell you what.
O puedes acercar la cámara.
Let's make the brightness of the screen less. Is that better?
Sí. Yes, I think it's a.
So did you know that you can dim the light on the constellation screen? So if you like to work in the darkness, I find that the standard brightness is too bright, especially if you're trying to look at the screen and then your eyes sort of like constrict and then you go back into the dark area. So this might be a little bit kinder to you. So I'm going to start with some basics. cassette. And if I put my glasses on, I can see what the separations are. Presbyopia, it's a beautiful thing. Beautiful thing. So, we have our cassette here. This is a very complex cassette. And a lot of the technology is in this cassette. This is the back of the cassette. This is the most important part of the cassette. It's where we measure the flow going to the eye and coming from the eye. And we use ultrasound sensor here that reads two transducers shooting into the infusion line here. All these other little notches here, these are all controlled by these little pistons that close off things like the aspiration flow to the eye or the infusion going to the eye. They're all very tied up with all of these. We have two infusion chambers and we have one tiny aspiration chamber, which then uses a peristaltic pump to feed into the bag. How do we put the cassette in? We put it straight in. Many people put the bottom in, but that's a mistake. Put it straight in, press, 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 until the picture gear changes. And that's the time to let go. If you don't keep pressing, sometimes you'll get a false low. It looks a little noisy. It looks like it's in, but then when you hang the BSS, fluid just keeps running. It hasn't stopped running. It just empties the bottle. Okay. Now, those of you that know me know that I'm obsessive compulsive and I do things a certain way, but I do things for reasons. I always like to put the connections on the cassette while the cassette is in the machine. And the reason is I want to use leverage, and I do put a lot of leverage on this. It needs to be at least at 2 o'clock, the little indicator tabs. If it's not, I've seen air being sucked into the tubing that goes into the lines, and that's not good, apparently. So we have the vitrectomy probe, we have the black and grey pneumatic lines that open and close the port. So put that in the corresponding connectors. Then we have the aspiration, the primary aspiration line. Those of you that watch Repair That Retina, you would have seen last week, one of the questions was, the vit probe, what is the colour of the aspiration line? Dark blue. This is a combined pack. So what we have here is irrigation line and a secondary aspiration line. On outcome systems for vit ret, blue is always suction, green is always irrigation or infusion. What else do we do? One of these. So here comes the giving set line for the bottle. So we have our red line here that takes the fluid from the bottle and puts it into the cassette that feeds the 2 infusion chambers. And this grey one is pressurization. So this sends pressurized air into the bottle so that the fluid will fall into the line when we ask for it. So let me get a bottle. I'll just get this one. Of course, you would have alcohol wipe the top and then just press straight in. Don't rotate it because you'll end up with rubber fragments in the fluid. And of course, you always should get some of the fluid in here. Now, the position of the bottle doesn't matter like in the Acurus. The position of the bottle is very critical, but it doesn't matter anymore with the Constellation. It's the fluid in the infusion chambers that's important. Alright, another tip that I like to do is with the green line, which is our infusion, and our clear line is our air line, comes together with the auto infusion valve, which allows you to switch to air without a 3-way stopcock. But you've got this white clamp, which you should use to turn on and off your infusion. I pull that back. And the reason I do that is that when you do go to use it, especially if you're outside the eye, when you clamp this, it actually sucks back a little air bubble into the infusion cannula. So by pulling it back, it sucks less because it uses the compliance of the tubing. Then we've got our calibration tray. And on our calibration tray, we've got the word Alcon on the side that you should open. So hold the rest and then peel it back so it doesn't bounce. So many people just leave it like that and let it bounce. If it bounces, it creates vibrations and it then gets a noisy calibration failure of a prime. So especially if you put it here and they haven't got it on a firm surface and the floor's a bit shaky and you're walking around, that causes that error. Of course, we've got a three-way stopcock. I don't know if many people use three-way stopcocks.
I use it sometimes.
Okay, what's the reason? Why do you put it on? And what justifies, when do you say I need to have one?
No, it's more than like I remember to put it and for gas, it's okay. When you want to put gas,
It gives you options.
yes. You don't have to unplug the other thing to put the gas. So.
Correct. I like it because in a catastrophe, something goes wrong and you want to stabilize the eye, it gives you options. Also, if you want to vent the eye, because we all know with this system, if we've got an air-filled eye and we're about to put gas in, you must vent the eye. Well, if you've got your three-way in there, you can easily turn it off here and open to this. This now is your vent. And you can control how much it vents by putting your finger over the top. In Japan, some doctors use a little valve that they screw on here. The anesthesiologists have these big-brawn valves, and they'll burp at 20 millimeters mercury or some other number. So they just put it on there and it happens automatically. Great little idea. Now, the downside to putting the three-way is that it's another trap for bubbles. So that's the negative.
Bubbles are annoying.
Exactly. So we've connected this. I put this on a stable surface. We're going to put a phaco handpiece on because this is a combined pack. And plug this in. We're going to take the tubing from here. And of course, those of you that know me, I'm a very old man and I learned the old way of doing things. You can put the tubing on like this, like I see technicians in nursing doing, but they come off very easily. And when you come off very easily, all the BSS falls out of it and suddenly you've got a handpiece full of air. And what happens when you're going to do the phaco? You get all this air coming out. So I'm old school. Blue one goes on first, the middle one. In, push, and turn. Little clockwise twist. Just a little one. It won't come off. In, clockwise twist, won't come off. I'm also old school in that you should have the tubing over your hands like this so that the tubing's not pulling on you while you're trying to do your maneuvers. Again, I'm an old man. This is the way we used to do it, teach. Phaco tip. There's only one phaco tip for this machine I highly recommend. That's the Mini Tip 45 Full Kelman. And we can discuss later if you guys are interested. But I'm going to show you the old-fashioned way of putting a phaco tip on, the right way. Turn till it stops, and then it's 1, 2. And then underneath the wings, because this is where most people unscrew the tip without thinking. Get underneath it and pull it off, because you can easily unscrew it. Sleeves. You must use the correct sleeve. Unfortunately, at Alpine, we move very slowly, and we have these purple micro sleeves, which are really not suitable for 2.2 incisions. You want to use the pink ultra sleeves. Again, presbyopia is a beautiful thing. My little technique for putting the sleeve on is to have the two irrigation ports going left and right, and have the tip either away from you or towards you. And then by lining up the ports either side, I don't screw this down, because every time you screw it down, the tip wants to come out one of the irrigation ports. So I just pull it down until it comes out the other side. And once it's past the tip, if I could see anything, I would screw down to the right way. Forgive me with my presbyopia. Maybe one of you doctors will know.
Three focus for Michael.
Not for me. OCD. I want a 7mm foldable monofocal or toric. Okay, so we've got everything plugged in. I'm just going to put the cap, if I have the cap, for the vitrectomy probe to protect it. Again, it's 27 gauge. You want to protect these tools. Tell your technicians, whoever sets up, leave the cap on until they hand it to you. You should take the cap off, because it will bend very easily, as you know. Okay, we got everything plugged in. And we can verify everything on the screen here. This is the nurse's setup screen. And we can see the fluidics are set up for a 27 gauge infusion line, a 27 gauge ultravit 10,000 probe. We're lucky, we've got a bevel one. We've got no auto set, but we've got an nozzle handpiece. And at the moment, we've got mini tip there, so I'm going to change that to mini tip. Nothing's primed or tuned, that's what the X's are all about. The premium cassette, and then any other accessories that we plug in will appear here. So for instance, the light pipe. We've got 4 ports here. I'm going to stick this into port 1. Comes up
So
here.
you knew it was level with something B?
Yeah.
B.
10K. Now, it so happens that when we release the product commercially, we only release the B. But before we did that, we had non-B versions.
Okay.
But when we found out that the B was better than the non-B, we went with that. So here you'll see 27 gauge plus. The RFID reads what it is and tells the machine, hey, I'm a 27 gauge, straight, not wide angle, light pipe. Please load the parameters for this light pipe so that when I turn on the light pipe, what I have in terms of illumination is 8 to 10 lumens at the tip. And if I plug in a different sort of light pipe, it will know what the 8 to 10 lumens is and put that in there for you. So it knows. It's very clever. You can program things in this way. All right. Are we ready to prime? We have thumbs up on the board there or no?
You guys have any questions?
In your opinion, are we ready to hit the prime button and prime this stuff? All right, they're very shy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of discussion about the correct height to hit the prime and calibration of this tray arm. So I know there was a lot of discussion that you should be at the height of the lower row connectors. And in theory, that's correct. That's what we messaged on. But if you do it here or lower, you're going to end up with more potential bubbles in your system that will come out when you don't expect. So, and the reason is, all the infusion comes in from the bottom of the cassette and upwards into all the chambers. And at the back here, at the connectors that feed, that go to the patient, there's a lot of turbulence as it's filling. If the tray is at this level or lower, the bubbles stay around that area. And then at some point, they just release and go into the infusion or the aspiration lines. But if I lift it up higher, and my preference is to be about the midpoint of the infusion chamber, or the bottom of the handle around here, then gravity can't do its work, and those bubbles behind the cassette will float to the top of the cassette, and they won't come out when you least expect them. this is not a guarantee that you will not get any bubbles, because bubbles are generated in different places, but this is what I call the macro bubbles. The big fat bubbles that come into the system, that's where you get these. If it's fine champagne bubbles, that's another deal, and we can talk about those. So, here we are. We're ready to go.
So where to put it at the...
Better to be here.
Okay.
Yeah, better to be higher than the lower row connectors. So, Vanessa, this next patient, I'm sorry to tell you I'm a bad fellow, but it's an endophthalmitis case. Are you going to take a vitreous sample?
Okay, we will take a visual sample, yes.
So,
Take a visual sample.
do you take an undiluted vitreous sample, or do you do a...
I'll try first to take an undiluted one.
Alright, so how do you do that now?
From here...
Do you prime, calibrate all that first?
Yes, I do.
Okay, which is what most people do.
Yes.
But then you end up with fluid in your aspiration line of the vitrectomy probe.
Yes.
And then you have to syringe out the fluid. Yeah?
Yes.
Push all the fluid out so you can take a dry sample. Or you can do something else. Look what we have here in the vitrectomy thing, skip prime. If I press that, knowing that I'm going to do a vitreous tap, it won't prime the aspiration line of the vitrectomy probe, so it stays dry. So let's hit. Oh! Now, I've just set up Dr. Alcon here. What do we notice here under infusion? Are we set up for infusion or IOP?
Infusion.
Because there's no second button, so I need to tell in my doctor profile to turn on IOP, so to enable that function. So we're going to come to IOP and enable. So now I'm going to hit save, and now the IOP button is turned on. It is activated, but it's not calibrated yet, so it's not orange and not filled in, it's grey. But after a successful prime, it should be okay. So let's hit the start prime. And while it's doing its thing, you'll notice here the priming sequence is shorter because there's one less line to prime.
But to take the tap, you will be able to push the pedal and...
I'll show you.
Yes.
We could do it.
Okay. I believe you. Okay.
You're going to use this.
I will be manual.
Yeah. And then we're going to prime manually. I'll show you how we do that. But this saves you at least trying to clean out the aspiration line. So, while it's doing its thing, do we have any questions while we wait for the machine to do its priming sequence?
Yes.
Yes, barely.
Yes.
Thank you very much. We have a good question. I'm traveling myself. I've experienced it so when going from phaco to vitrectomy, it always asks me to do a resetting of the equipment. Is there a way to avoid that?
So one more time, what are you doing that it's asking you to reset? Sorry, there was a little bit of noise.
Phaco,
You go from
from phaco to vitrectomy, to pursue vitrectomy.
and you're getting a reset.
Yeah, it asks me to reprime or reset the set.
And everything was primed beforehand.
Well, they were doing only phaco before I got there.
Right. It sounds to me like they haven't successfully primed everything. And the system says, hey, you're trying to do a vitrectomy, but they primed the phaco part of it, and it's not going to let you proceed if you haven't primed the vitrectomy part. So get your Alcon representative to come in there and observe. It's the constellation mechanism. So get your Alcon rep to come and visit you and look at the way the staff are setting it up. The important thing here too is if you guys, many people don't know about this, and I don't know why. And as soon as this is finished, it's almost there. But there's actually in-service videos in the machine. And so if you're stuck, you get called in at night, and you don't know, you can refresh your memory by going to the in-service videos. That's just because the ingenuity. So let me take you, come back to setup, no, and step by step, which we changed in the software here. Step by step, we can get tips. Let's see, I want to set up for VitPro, and it will walk you through the steps. But there's also help videos, close. If we go show help video, let's say in here, because I'm on VitPro, it's showing you the steps. Of course, it's not going to do it for me, but you can make this bigger and you can change the position. It will, step by step, it's going to show you what to do. It's going to have writing, and it's going to go through each step. So you've got these, you've also got the manual as well. So lots of stuff there. But I would get your Alcon rep to come and make sure that the staff know how to prime it. Because that's what it is. You haven't primed the Vit probes. So it's going to make you do it. Okay. Okay, we're here. We're in the surgical step. And we're going to do that sample. We don't have any fluid in here in this. So now you can have your colleague doing the suction while you hold the probe in the eye and run the cutter to extract your sample. Having done that, got your sample, you need to join this together. And now that this is primed and calibrated, I can put this back down again. And we need to put this in a bowl, and I would use this protector, come up here where the probe is, and hit test instrument, and it won't start priming, it'll do a subprime until you press this little play button. When you do that, it'll now suck fluid up all the way back to the cassette, and then test the probe at that point. And then you'll have a fully primed system. How many of you knew about the skip prime? Do you think that's useful?
I think it's useful.
Yeah.
All right. What else do we want to talk about here? Throw some suggestions at me. Otherwise, I'm going to go deep into the menu.
IOP.
IOP?
Yeah, I think.
You want to have an explanation of IOP?
No, I think many people,
Yeah.
sometimes I didn't know about the control IOP of the 10 millimeters.
Oh,
the
patient eye level.
Exact patient eye level, so maybe it's of interest to
Everybody. So, do you know about patient eye level? Patient eye level is a parameter in the machine here that tells the machine where the eye is. And the reference point is this lower row connectors. So it's asking you to find out where is the eye relative to this. And where we put that data is back here under doctor, surgical, and here we are. Little man on the table, and as you can see here, if I move this, the little man at the table goes down, and you can have units of centimeters or inches. So what? Why is this important? The reason is a little thing called gravity. For you to get this 25 millimeters of mercury in the eye, the system assumes that the eye is at this level. Anything below that, you have to add the gravity effect. And the gravity effect is 1.86 millimeters per every inch that you're below. So if you're 10 inches below, and let's call it 2 millimeters for every inch, we'll round up, that's 20 millimeters more pressure than what it says here. So if you're a surgeon that likes to use, like I was in surgery the other day with somebody that likes to use 45 as their pressure, but they were 10 inches below, they're not getting 45, they're getting 65 in the eye. And what do you think happened to the cornea? Didn't take long to get clouded. So just be aware that that's a big thing to get this accurate. The other effect is on suction. Because when I press the pedal and I'm 10 inches below and I've got 20 millimeters of mercury gravity effect here, when I first touch the pedal, it unlocks one of those pincher valves. So it opens the aspiration line to the aspiration chamber. What do you think happens? All this aspirant starts flowing back into the eye because it's got 20 millimeters of mercury pushing it out. But if I set the patient eye level, when you're at zero vacuum, it recalibrates the zero to be 20 millimeters of mercury. So it's applying a vacuum so that way there's no downward force of fluid going back into the eye. So you don't get regurgitation. So you would have seen, as you get smaller and smaller gauge, the effect of that is dramatic. In 25 gauge, you'll start noticing regurgitation if your patient eye level is not set. And in 27, it's the same volume in the line that's pushing down a smaller hole, a smaller shaft, so it comes out at a greater velocity. So you notice it even more in 27 if your patient eye level is not set. And then you'll also notice it, let's say you've done a vitrectomy and you've got this floating flap that's hinged and you want to trim it or something. When you go to touch the pedal to try and trim it, it blows it away. That's regurgitation coming down the system. So if you set the patient eye level, you get the aspiration benefit and you get the correct IOP. There. Any questions on that?
No.
No? Good. There'll be a test at the end. I hope you pass. Just while we're on this page, so I was with another surgeon earlier in the week who was annoyed at the pinging when you're in elevated infusion pressure. So, you get this warning, ping, ping, if you go to 60, and you get the lady sort of saying, you're at 60, pressure, whatever, and it's got the time. Well, that is set by you. It's default, and here it is. 51 is the threshold. So you're telling me here, elevated infusion threshold, I want you to start warning me when anything from 51 and above. But you can change that to be anywhere you want. Let's go to IOP here. And can we get a close-up on the screen, guys?
Yes.
Yeah. Maybe I can turn it to... Does that work? Okay. So here you would have seen where we set the IOP. So enable, disable. This function here is from the days of when we had non-valve cannulas. We didn't have a valve solution when we launched Constellation, and we would get that fountain effect coming out of an open sclerotomy. So this was the mitigation for it. So how does IOP work? IOP is measuring flow, infusion flow going to the eye. If I've got a leak, it sees flow coming in, and it says, there's a leak here. I have to increase the pressure in the infusion cassette, in the infusion chamber, because there's obviously a leak and I have to compensate for it. But what happens in an open sclerotomy is, all that happens is the fountain then grows. And then it says, oh, it's getting faster, the flow to the eye. And it says, oh, it's a big leak. So then it increases the pressure again. And it's a vicious cycle. And so you end up with this huge fountain, and you end up with 120 millimeters of pressure in the infusion chambers, trying to equalize the pressure in your eye. This says, hang on a minute. When you trigger a threshold of say 6 cc's a minute for 23 gauge or 27 gauge, you set these independently. Stop pushing, stop chasing that pressure. So the fountain then doesn't grow. And you can play around with different numbers. I've done 0 through to bigger numbers. I kind of like low numbers. But again, this is only active if your foot's off the pedal. Why? Because in theory, it's when you come out of the eye, and if you come out of the eye, you've got open sclerotomy, and you shouldn't be on the pedal. So that's when it's active. And if you want to bypass this, if this is enabled, you touch the pedal, and it shuts this off. Because it assumes you're back in the eye, and the sclerotomies are closed. But, cut a long story short, shouldn't